ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਪੱਖ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ। ਮੈਂ ਦਵਿੰਦਰ ਤੂਰ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਗੈਸਟ ਜੁੜ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਜੂਲੀਅਸ ਟਿਆਂਸਨ। ਜੂਲੀਅਸ ਟਿਆਂਸਨ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਆਫ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਮਿਸੀਸਾਗਾ ਤੋਂ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਮੀਦਵਾਰ ਨੇ। ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਆ ਉਹ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਊਗੀ ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਓ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰੀਏ। ਮਿਸਟਰ ਟਿਆਂਸਨ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ ਫॉर joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my privilege and an honor.
Before we start, I need to know something about yourself. So tell us something about your background when you came to Canada and how politically you are involved. What made you to decide to run for Conservative Party of Canada?
Sure. Well, I came to Canada way back in 1985. I first landed in the city of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and I was working then as an accountant with a company called Deloitte. Well, it used to be called Deloitte Haskins and Sells, and now it's just simply called Deloitte. And I was there involved for a few years, and then shortly after that, I shifted career. I was involved in church work as well as community work. And so for almost 23, 24 years, I was involved in that field and had helped establish about 18 churches across Canada. And then at the same time, I also established a community center here in Mississauga. But let me just backtrack a little bit. I stayed in Saskatoon for about 16 years, and in 2000, I moved here in Ontario, in the city of Mississauga, and in that city, I established a community center called the Gateway Center for New Canadians, where we have served over 800 to 1,000 young people every single year, and a growing client base of almost 3,000 to 4,000 every single year. So that is what I have been doing for the last 29 years of my stay here in Canada, and in the last 3 years I have started my own business since I have resigned in my position as the executive director of the Gateway Center. In terms of my involvement in the Conservative Party, I have been involved with the Conservative Party since 1988. Originally in the city of Saskatoon, I was campaigning for the member of parliament then in that city. I believe it was Saskatoon Rosetown Bigger riding, and it was the riding held by Ray Natishin, who became the Attorney General and eventually became the first Ukrainian Governor General of Canada. So I have had a long history of involvement in politics in terms of volunteering and mobilizing not only my community but other communities to participate in our democracy here in Canada. So that has been my involvement.
So since you are from Philippines, I have to ask you this question right from the beginning. There were some problems with the Philippines workers, I'm talking about the temporary foreign workers who came from Philippines, especially the low-skill, low-wages workers who are not eligible to apply for the permanent residency program in Canada.
Yes.
How you feel as a conservative candidate? How are you going to defend this? Your party stand on this?
Well, I think the party stand has always been that we would not allow citizens who would be temporary for a long time in this country. And one of the things that we have done to improve that situation is that those who may have come here under the low-skilled and temporary foreign workers class is that eventually, obviously, they should not be remaining here in this country because the work itself is temporary. That is what it is. And there will be an opportunity for them, perhaps next time around, that they would want to come to this country and immigrate permanently. So I think there have been some strengthening of the programs that we had in terms of the temporary foreign workers program, and ensuring that a majority of the programs, or at least the reform that we are introducing into the program, particularly the temporary foreign workers program, would in fact lead towards permanent residency or a pathway towards citizenship. So that has been the direction of the government, because I don't think that we should continue to grow the temporary foreign workers class without necessarily identifying the types of people that should be given the opportunity to become permanent residents here in Canada.
But since a lot of low-skilled workers came from Philippines, like as nannies and low-skilled wages workers, So what kind of response you get from the doors, especially you are from the Philippine descent, and what kind of response you get from the Philippine temporary workers?
Well, let me just go back to what you have commented, and it was probably a comment in passing, particularly the live-in caregiver program, or what you would call as nannies here in Canada. I believe that that program, to begin with, was in fact a very flawed program because it was a racialized program. When 90% of the participants come from one particular people group, then it is a racialized program, and if it is a racialized program, then it is not a good program. And I am proud that our Canadian government, our conservative Canadian government, have made sure that we reformed that program, allowing temporary foreign workers who are under the live-in caregiver program, eliminated the live-in requirement, ensure that there are opportunities for those who are participants to, in fact, settle in a number of skills categories so that they will not just simply become, settled here and continue to work as caregivers, but in fact there are opportunities for them to actually work in the fields that they were originally trained from the Philippines. So I am proud of that accomplishment. I'm proud of the fact that we have tactically de-racialized that program in such a way that not only Filipinos can avail of that program, but others who may choose to come and use the caregiver program as a means to permanent residency in this country.
Okay, now back to election campaign. We all know this is the longest election campaign in Canada so far when it comes
Yes.
to the federal election. How do you feel about that? Are you enjoying about that?
Well, I feel great. I enjoy campaigning. As I've mentioned earlier, I have been involved in the party since 1988, and now as a candidate, I feel that the long campaign or the longer campaign is actually good for our Canadian democracy because I think people, in as much as it's the summer months and people may not necessarily be paying attention to it, but I think there are opportunities for all parties to continue to roll out their policies and there are opportunities for parties to explain several positions, and the consequence of that is constituents or people who will be voting for these parties would have ample opportunity to think through as to the positions of the different parties. And it gives for a longer conversation, I believe, in the constituency level or in the riding level, and allows candidates like myself to actually interact with constituencies and make sure that we do present our own policies. Because at the end of the day, the voters are always right, and they would vote for the kind of policies that is good for their families, and good for the cities, and good for the communities, and good for the country.
When it comes to economy, that's the number one issue in this election campaign.
Yes.
And Conservative Party do believe that they can do better job than other opposition parties. But
Yes.
opposition parties are blaming Conservative Party for running 8 straight deficits. My question straight to you, sir, are we in a recession or not?
I don't believe we are in a recession. I believe that there is one sector that is struggling right now, and that is the resource sector. But if you look into all of the other categories in our economy, every single sector is in fact improving. I mean, we still have a robust housing market, and obviously because of our low Canadian dollar, I think the manufacturing is going to be posting some good results. Other areas of the economy are in fact growing. So I don't accept the premise that we are in fact in a recession because it doesn't feel like it. Obviously, those who are hurting are in the resource sector, and we need to take care of those workers who are impacted by the low oil value, and we just need to make sure that there is enough government program to assist those workers that have been affected by it.
When it comes to giving some benefits to the Canadians, Conservative Party announced that they will give a child tax care benefit to the Canadian families, and before they also introduced tax splitting, which will benefit the Canadian families too. But on the contrary to that, NDP doesn't believe in that, and also bringing a $15 a day care program to help the Canadian families. How you will justify that?
Well, I am a firm believer that parents are the experts in how to raise their own children. And one of the biggest policy rationale in terms of enhancing the universal child care benefit is that it is important that parents do have the right to raise their own children, and by doing so, we give them tax breaks that would allow them to maximize their abilities so that they can raise their own children. When you begin to introduce a $15 child care program and have that nationalized, I don't think it is going to benefit the whole population of Canada. It would benefit some, but in totality, it would create a very huge bureaucracy that would definitely siphon more of our resources and would have very little benefit and takes away the privilege of raising, or families actually, or parents raising their own children.
When it comes to NDP and Liberal, both want to raise the minimum wage. NDP want to raise to $15, and Liberal want to put some corporate taxes and also the personal income taxes they want to increase for the high income earners. Will you justify that the business which is slowing down all over Canada now, can they afford that raise to $15 or more corporate taxes?
Well, this I know, having been in business myself, as well as being raised in a family that has an extensive business in the Philippines. This I know, when government begin to tell businesses what needs to be done and should be done, business have legs. The resources that these business people have, they have legs, and they would say bye-bye and go to another jurisdiction. The truth of the matter is that we need to facilitate business in this country. We cannot over-regulate businesses in this country. We need to facilitate in such a way that we have our low tax regime in such a way that business can be very competitive, investment can be attracted, and the consequence of that is we would build a stronger economy. And when businesses are good, and employment is being extended or at least expanded, then it benefits everyone. But when you begin to, tinker on the wage the wage of the people and begin to dictate people in terms of businesses, telling them, government telling the businesses what to do and how they should conduct their business, I don't think that would stimulate growth. I think it would repress growth. I think business people and businesses will have second thoughts about, investing in this country, and investors will be driven away. So I don't think it is a good idea.
When it comes to your own province, Ontario, the Premier of Ontario, Ms. Kathleen Wynne, blamed Mr. Harper that he does not cooperate with the provincial governments. He does not have a good record in dealing with the provinces. You think her objection is right or not?
Well, I think our Premier Wynne, should be focusing in running Ontario. We have enough problems in this province that she needs to pay attention to, as opposed to meddling in a federal election.
When it comes to that, she's blaming them like for a provincial pension plan. Why your party is opposing the provincial pension plan she is bringing up?
Again, I go back to what I have said earlier, that the Conservative plan is always low tax, facilitate business, and making sure that our economy continues to grow through that approach. This new Ontario pension plan is, again, a tax on business. And in fact, this morning I was talking to a couple of business people, and last night also as well, and they said this is going to kill our business. This is something that we cannot afford. And if we continue in this path, there will be a number of small businesses that will be shut down, or would choose and voluntarily shut down and move elsewhere.
Okay, and when it comes to Bill C-51 and Bill C-24, there is a lot of opposition all over Canada. How you will justify bringing Bill C-51 to protect Canadians?
Well, I think there will be opposition regardless of what kind of a bill that we will be introducing in a situation that we are in globally. But I don't think there is a widespread opposition. I mean, obviously the media would propose that there is a widespread opposition, but there is I think in the community level, in the people that I talk to in Mississauga Center, this is something that is being welcomed simply because they know that we are in a situation globally where the enemy and the enemies of our values, the enemies of democracy, the enemies of the Western values and the values that we espouse here in the West do not necessarily engage in a conventional manner. And so there has to be an opportunity where countries like Canada should strengthen our laws so that we should be able to combat those things that would destroy our values, would destroy our democracy.
We had an incident in Edmonton yesterday. One guy got a ticket for $543 from police because he was displaying a slogan which saying F word and last name Harper. F, that's 3 letters, and then Harper. You think he's got a freedom of speech, or this slogan shouldn't be there at all?
Well, I came from a background where we do have high respect for our leaders, and obviously with the leaders that we have here in this country, they should be accorded the same amount or the same type of respect that we as citizens have. In as much as we may disagree with our leaders, but I don't think it is right and proper that we should be disparaging of our leaders. Now, it's debatable whether it is a violation of his freedom and right to speak, but at the same time, I don't think as common people and decent people, would be so disparaging of our leaders, regardless of what their positions are. I mean, we can agree to be disagreeable, right? And we can take opposing sides on a particular issue, but I don't think it is right and proper for decent human beings to be constantly attacking people and on a personal level and using words that are derogatory or in fact completely indecent.
And Mike Duffy's Senate scandal is also already becoming his election issue. Yesterday what happened is we saw that Prime Minister is frustrated, same as his supporters, and one of his supporters calling media shit and using like absolute wrong language against media. Will you justify that?
Well, again, I go back to the premise that I said earlier. I mean, we can agree to disagree, but it doesn't mean that we should be using derogatory language to express our frustration and disagreement. There may be, some frustration in some members or those who are supporters of our prime minister, but at the same time, this is not something that we should be condoning.
Okay, when it comes to immigration, when the riding you are running, I think immigration will be an important issue.
Yes.
Your party has always blamed that they are going to kill the immigration, especially about the social settlement of immigration when it talks about family reunification or parental immigration. There is a limit of only 5,000 parents you can sponsor, and that can be filled like in the first week of opening the applications. Will you justify the cap of 5,000 on the parental application of immigration?
Well, let me just go back first and paint to you the wider picture of what the direction of this government has been and will continue to be when it comes to immigration. This Conservative Party believes in immigration. And the fact of the matter is over 2.5 million permanent residents have been admitted into this country over the last 9 years of the Harper government. On average, it is anywhere from 250 to 285,000 every single year, the highest ever. Now, we may disagree in terms of the type of immigrants that we would be letting in and the categories, particularly parents and grandparents and so on and so forth. But the reality is the economic impact of the type of immigrants that we will be letting in has definitely an impact in the future generation. This country does not produce babies, and that's the reason why we have this high immigration. And the consequence of having high immigration is that we would continue to feed our economy because our economy needs workers and skilled workers. And if we continue in the path of which we had in the past, were, in as much as I do believe in family reunification and so on and so forth, but I think it is quite important that we focus our immigration program to be able to let in the right kind of people who would be able to help build our nation and build our economy, and making sure that Canada remains prosperous, strong, and free.
So when it comes to environment, Conservative Party of Canada does not have a good record. After pulling off Kyoto, and also since last 9 years, we're not even close to matching the emission targets set by us. So if you are not meeting the targets, how can you justify that your party is good or better than the opposition parties?
Well, let me just again paint to you the bigger picture and historical picture of where the Conservative Party is at. About 30 years ago, we had a conservative government led by our Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney at that time. And history has vindicated that person, because over the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, he has been honored as the greenest Prime Minister in Canada ever. And although I don't, I can't remember when to cite an article or to cite the honor or the distinction that was given to him, but he was very instrumental in making sure that the whole issue of the acid rain here in southern Ontario, including some of the northern states, were actually being addressed, and it was addressed quite drastically here in Canada. Now, going back now to our current conservative government, I don't think it would be good for Canada to be expected to ensure that we do continue on in the path of greenhouse the emission to be lowered when the biggest polluters in the world are not necessarily committed towards the same objective. And so I think the Conservative Party has introduced has introduced a more sensible approach towards this issue, and ensuring that it does not damage our economy, and at the same time it keeps those who are polluters to be responsible for their actions.
When it comes to your own local riding, who is the competitor that you think you are going to compete with? Is the candidate from NDP or the Liberal candidate?
Well, all the candidates are obviously upstanding individuals, and I admire people who would be putting their names on the ballot and would be campaigning based on the policies that their parties that they're affiliated with. And we have two main opposition within the Mississauga Centre. One is from the NDP, and the other one is from the Liberal. The Liberal is Omar Al-Gabra, and the NDP is Farin Khan. Both individuals are obviously good candidates that are being offered by their parties, and we will just work hard in making sure that Mississauga Centre will be won by the Conservatives.
When it comes to running incumbents in the elections, normally they have the advantage, but this time more than 35 incumbents MPs are not running from Conservative Party of Canada. Is it going to benefit the party to bring the new faces, or is it going to hurt it?
Oh, most definitely. I think any organization that allows a natural renewal and which which allows for a rebirth often, and new blood and new ideas, new faces, that would just produce a dynamic party that is constantly in tune with what is happening in this country. I think this is good for us, this is good for our party, and we have successfully nominated an open nomination in our parties in different ridings where there is in fact a nomination contest, and ensuring that the right candidate would actually win the nomination. So I'm very confident that this is in fact going to help the party.
You already told us the best policies of your party. Now tell me something about NDP. Which policies you don't like from that party?
I'm not really privy a lot in terms of what the policies that the NDP is in fact offering. This I know, that the ideology of the left, which has been a failed ideology in other places, not only here in this country, but in other parts of the world, is very dangerous to our economy. As I've mentioned earlier, I first settled in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan was led by an NDP government for about 21 years. And that province did not become an economic powerhouse as it is right now under a conservative government, simply because the policies of the NDP hindered the development of resources in Saskatchewan, and it hindered the development of industry and business in Saskatchewan. Now, if you're going to apply that in a national level, can you just imagine the kind of economy it would produce under an NDP government? It would be a government that would be beholden to a lot of special interest groups. It would be a government that would be making sure that we would be taxed beyond our capacity to have a sustainable income and a sustainable life in this country. And you will have a government that will continue to punish success as opposed to reward success.
How about Liberal?
Unfortunately, the Liberal government is probably moving in the same direction also as well.
So when you are going to fight with two left-wing parties, you think is an advantage for you?
Well, obviously it will be an advantage, but at the same time, you know, the two of these two parties are formidable parties in our country, and obviously they too would like to win. But at the same time, you know, I don't take that advantage for granted. We work hard on the ground and make sure that we deliver a win in Mississauga Centre.
Normally, the federal politicians, when it comes to politicians from Ontario specifically, they have to speak something against province like Alberta. We have heard from NDP politicians, we heard from even the leaders like Trudeau or Tom Mulcair. Being a Conservative Party candidate, you think it's fair to bash or say something wrong about oil industry in Alberta?
Do I, coming from Ontario?
Yes.
Well, obviously every single province in the Confederation is very important, and Alberta is one province that has been quite successful over the last several decades and have contributed much than it has taken in the federal system that we have through its transfer payment and contribution to the net growth of our economy. I think it is not wise for us to be, you know, bashing one region of the country against the other. I don't think that is helpful, and I don't think that is constructive in a federal arrangement.
At the end, what message you want to give it to our listeners?
Well, this is my first time to run as a political candidate, although I have been involved since 1988 and have helped over a dozen MPs and MPPs who are conservatives win their seats and their riding. What I can say is that over the last 9 years and a half that the Conservative Party has been in power, it has delivered, it has been successful in stewarding our economy from a very ferocious downturn in 2008 and 2009. It has successfully gotten out of a deficit of the last 7 years and into a balanced budget so that we no longer have to borrow money from elsewhere. And it has created net new jobs of 1.3 million. Majority of those jobs are in the private sector, and majority of those private sector jobs are in fact high-paying jobs. It has delivered in a number of its promises in several files. We have promised that we would enhance child care benefit, and we made that promise, and that was a promise that was delivered. We made sure that seniors will have the capability to save more money, so therefore we increased or we doubled the limit of the tax-free savings account, which is going to benefit seniors and be able to help them to be able to save money that will not be taxed in the future. That was a promise, and it was a promise that was delivered and promise kept. And we have promised that we will We will continue to beef up our security and make sure that we do have the right tools so that we will keep Canadians safe and secure. That was a promise that was delivered and a promise that was kept by the Conservative Party government under our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. And so this, I can say we are a party that keeps our promises and will continue to keep our promises to Canadians.
Mr. Tiangson, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.